Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Daner. We may have met before. I'm one of the Tableau visionaries, and I'm also a forums ambassador. Recently, I added a post to my blog on ways to solve six of the more difficult problems we see coming up over and over again. And I'm going to share the solution to one of those types today with you, and that's a so called combo chart. If you're familiar with Excel, you know that a combination of bars and lines is a standard chart type. But we don't have that option in Tableau. And I'm going to show you two different ways of creating that. And I want to start with this data. I'm going to go out here to the data source and just show you real quick what this data looks like. I've got five measures here: sales, quantity, number of customers, our average number of customers that are purchasing the product, and the average selling price. And that's data that I just loaded into Tableau. Now we can take that data and we can look at it like this in a stacked form, and I can use measured names and measured values to create one axis in a dual axis chart. And I've decided to put on the bars the number of customers, the quantity, and the sales. And then I created another value that I call the average selling price, which is nothing more than the quantity divided by sales. And I can put that on another uh, uh, another axis, and then I do a dual axis chart, and everything looks fine. The problem comes about when we want to do a side by side chart where we take a look at the individual bars side by side and then add the average selling price. And it breaks the line. It doesn't work. Well, I'm going to show you how we can work with that today to come back with a chart that looks like this in a side by side bar chart and the lines. Now, the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to go back to the data source page and we're going to pivot our measures. And yes, you can pivot measure names and measure values. We're just going to pivot those. And when we do that, you can see for each date, we have each one of the measures and we got the value associated with that measure. Now we can come back and we can create our bar chart from that data. What I'm going to do first is break that data back down into two groups, the bars and the lines. And you can say, well, wait a minute, we just went to all the work to pivot those to put them all together, and now you're taking them apart. And yes, that's what I'm doing. We're going to use this field and we're going to say, hey, if the pivot name is the average selling price or the average number of customers, make it a line type chart, and anything else, make it a bar type chart. So now we've got the values broken down into lines and bars, and we can use a simple formula like this. If lines or bars equals bars, then the pivot values, and that's going to be the value for the bars, and we do the same thing for the lines. And we can see we've got the line values separate from the bar values. And it looks like, well, we can make a dual axis chart with that, but we need one additional thing. We need a place to put each one of the individual bars and a starting point for each one of the individual lines. They have to have a discrete place in our continuous field that represents the date. And we're going to do that with index. Now I've added one additional thing. I put in a parameter here just so I had a way to move the gap between these bars, make it a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. All we have to do is to create this date is we use a date function called date add, and I'm going to add to the date a number of days equal to the index times, and index is a table calculation, index times this value in the multiplier there, the space multiplier. And we're going to use that as our date field. And we're going to increment that every time. We're going to increment the index every time the measure name changes. And that's really all there is to it. I'm going to show you, we can break this apart. We can look at it as a dual axis. Here we've got our bars separate from our lines. When we put them together, we're going to break the chart for just a second. You can dual axis and you can put them back together. We'll go to our line chart and we can see we've added this name, measure names on the chart. We don't want that there. And if we take that off, we've got the chart we're looking for. Okay, I've used a spacer here. For my view, a space of 4 is about right, but you might want to change that. You might want to make it a little larger or a little smaller, whatever works best for you. Now, I'm going to show you one additional way of doing this. We used index to calculate these values. We could also use what I call the brute force method. And what I've done here is I've looked and I said, well, for each one of these pivot field names, if the name is sales, I don't want to add any increment to the date. I want sales plotted on the actual date. And if it's quantity, I want to increment that by 5 days. So now I've got a gap of 5 days in there between those two bars. And if it's a number of customers, I want 10 days. So I put 5 days and 5 days. And then I want to come back in for the average for my lines and put them in between the bars, okay, at 3 days and 8 days. And we do the same sort of thing. We plot it the same way. And as you can see visually, it looks like a continuous line chart, but you and I both know that we've incremented those days and we moved those points on that chart just a little bit. Thank you for your time today. It's been a lot of fun. Bye now.